I think honestly, I've sort of argued before that, the Ukraine war appears, well, I wrote a piece about it. Ukraine, that whole conflict appears to have been instigated by the CIA. And it was, not that long after the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. And of course, U.S. entry into Afghanistan was intimately linked to the CIA. And so losing Afghanistan is sort of this black hole for, black budget money and also, opium, heroin trafficking, among other things. You sort of have that same black budget hole open up when Ukraine starts, and a lot of weird things go on. So, I mean, there's some interesting things that I think went into the genesis of the Ukraine conflict.
The United States has long perfected the art of hiding its darkest operations behind the most respectable facades. Whether it's exporting democracy through drone strikes or funding proxy wars in the name of humanitarian aid, its global influence is often built not on diplomacy, but deception. Among the quietest yet most powerful tools in its arsenal is USAID, an agency that, despite its branding as a force for good, has been repeatedly linked to violent regime changes, covert intelligence operations, and the destabilization of sovereign nations. Now, in the middle of yet another reshuffle of the U.S. foreign policy machine, some are celebrating what appears to be the dismantling of USAID. But that narrative, according to investigative journalist Whitney Webb, is dangerously misleading. The agency isn't being shut down, it's being repositioned, tucked under the wing of a Rubio-run State Department known for its hawkish foreign policy and aggressive stance on Latin America. But Whitney's warning doesn't stop there. In her view, while the public fixates on the fate of USAID, a much more insidious development is unfolding. Elon Musk, a tech billionaire with growing ties to the military-industrial complex, is quietly building a digital empire. Under the guise of convenience and innovation, he's transforming his social media platform into an everything app with access to Americans' financial data, real-time communication, and behavioral patterns. And he's doing it with the full blessing of the state. Webb argues that this alliance between big tech and big government marks a turning point where power is no longer confined to the halls of Washington, but distributed among a handful of oligarchs who operate behind screens and firewalls. The tools of regime change once used abroad are now being tested on the domestic population, cloaked in sleek apps and friendly interfaces. If we're not paying attention, Webb warns, we won't see tyranny coming, because it won't arrive with tanks or troops. It will arrive with algorithms, digital IDs, and one app to rule them all. As we present clips from Whitney's recent explosive interview with Katie Halper, please like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications bell for more insightful deep dives. We appreciate the support and hope you enjoy the video.
While it is true that USAID or USAID is an intelligence cutout that has engaged in financing regime change and other terrible things, I feel like the independent media focus on USAID being quote unquote dismantled, it is actually going to be rehoused at the Rubio-run State Department, is distracting us from the fact that Musk, who is trying to turn SX into the everything app that he wants to run more than half of the US financial system and which is launching payment rails this year, just gained access to Americans' private banking information via the Treasury payment system. The Everything app model, embodied by the infamous WeChat, is effectively a public-private app used to surveil people's communications and financial activity with often Orwellian consequences. USAID absolutely sucks, but we also need to keep our eye on the ball as big tech oligarchs beget techno-tyranny, and we'll do so very easily if we fail to scrutinize them and pay attention to the things they are openly building. Musk in his new role does not have to divest from any business interests, including X, and can easily use the Department of Government Efficiency or Doge or other means to fulfill his everything app desires and kingmake companies which he owns or controls or in which he is deeply invested.
So it's been 2 months since you wrote that. And have you been proven correct, would you say?
Well, I guess it depends on who you ask, because as I understand it, the narrative around Doge has been extremely polarizing. I haven't been on Twitter much since I issued off that tweet. But people said that USAID, including Musk and Trump, that USAID was going to be completely shut down. No, it was rehoused at the Rubio-run State Department. People claimed that this would somehow mean that the era of USAID and, these style intelligence, cutouts like USAID or the National Endowment for Democracy would somehow stop doing the bad things that they have been known to do in the past, and that their efforts to cultivate regime change would stop. There's no reason to think that will happen. First of all, the National Endowment for Democracy does the same type of stuff like USAID. It has not been defunded, and it openly, according to its co-founder in the early 90s, said, "We do what the CIA used to do a few years ago." So they continue to engage in those kinds of activities, and USAID had been outed in the past year and a half or so in particular for engaging in these kind of shady activities. Generally, when some sort of intelligence cutout or front is overly exposed, they just move it to they either privatize it and move it into the private sector, or they reshuffle it into different agencies. So, Marco Rubio running the State Department is a very big advocate of regime change in a variety of countries, especially Latin America, and has in the past been very, I don't know really the best word, been extremely pro-USAID, I guess. Very supportive of the U.S. government giving USAID a lot of money in targeting Venezuela, for example, and Cuba, other countries in Latin America. Very supportive of that. And also, Musk himself, who was saying USAID is bad in this, is kind of became infamous, though, of course, a lot of people have forgotten this, that during that, the coup in Bolivia a few years ago, he said, "We will coup whoever we want, deal with it," on Twitter. And there was a lot of rumors that a lot of the reasoning behind that coup was because of Bolivia's extensive lithium reserves, which his company Tesla is very interested in. And the previous Bolivian government under Evo Morales had entered into joint ventures with Chinese state-owned firms for the purpose of exploiting that lithium. And then under the coup government, it moved to efforts were made to exploit that with U.S., joint ventures with U.S. companies, right? So to think that regime change will suddenly stop because these people are calling the shots at all. And the State Department itself has engaged in regime change. There's numerous occasions. Probably the best known is Henry Kissinger, when he was head of the State Department, helping plan the coup in Chile in 1973 with the CIA. This is something that has been going on a very long time. The State Department and the CIA have a documented, very symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, it seems like this is just one of the many examples of people kind of projecting their anti-establishment hopes onto Trump.
Sure.
We see draining the swamp. We saw the last time. We see it this time. The president of peace. Maybe I would argue that there has been, we'll see what happens, but there's maybe a departure from Biden when it comes to Ukraine. But certainly when it comes to Gaza and Yemen, he's not a president of peace.
No, well, of course not. No. And I think, honestly, I've sort of argued before that, the Ukraine war appears, I wrote a piece about it. Ukraine, that whole conflict appears to have been instigated by the CIA. And it was, not that long after the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan. And of course, U.S. entry into Afghanistan was intimately linked to the CIA. And so losing Afghanistan is sort of this black hole for, black budget money, and also, opium, heroin trafficking, among other things. You sort of have that same black budget hole open up when Ukraine starts, and a lot of weird things go on. So, there's some interesting things that I think went into the genesis of the Ukraine conflict.
What we're witnessing isn't just the privatization of intelligence. It's the global corporatization of warfare, surveillance, and reconstruction. Whitney Webb pulls back the curtain on a reality that most media won't touch. The U.S. isn't just exporting democracy, it's exporting corporate dominion, propped up by tech oligarchs and enforced by military proxies. Take Ukraine. In the wake of one of the most geopolitically charged conflicts of the 21st century, the country hasn't been liberated. It's been liquidated. Its reconstruction fund isn't run by its people. It's managed by BlackRock and JP Morgan. Its digital infrastructure is now the property of Microsoft and Silicon Valley. Its military command? Reinforced and surveilled by Palantir, Anduril, and Peter Thiel's surveillance empire. Even its communication grid is now tethered to Elon Musk's Starlink. This isn't aid, this is an acquisition. And behind this aggressive absorption of a sovereign state lies a bipartisan empire, one that spans both Trump and Biden. Peace isn't pursued for humanitarian reasons. It's triggered when it's time to cash in. As Webb points out, U.S. corporations didn't seize chunks of Ukraine expecting a loss. They expect a return on investment. War builds the demand. Peace secures the monopoly. This is the underbelly of the empire. Multinational power, protected by intelligence, enriched by conflict, and immortalized through figureheads like Trump and Musk. Men marketed as disruptors, while serving as deeply embedded instruments of the same machine. Let's get back to the video.
If you look at what happened over the course of the Ukraine conflict with respect to just Ukraine itself, basically U.S. multinational corporations took over the entire country. Its reconstruction fund is run by BlackRock and JP Morgan. Its major aspects of its government were taken over by Microsoft and U.S. Silicon Valley companies. Its military became dominated by and argue in Clearview AI. And a lot of these companies that are now seeing an ascendance or an increase in contracts under the Trump administration. Of course, Elon Musk's, Starlink was also involved with the Ukrainian military. And now Ukraine is pretty much entirely dependent on these U.S. multinational companies. And a lot of them have ties to the Trump administration. So, if you're the Trump administration, peacetime allows the rebuilding that these companies will control to continue. So, those companies would not have made those investments and taken those chunks of, the Ukrainian state or military, or, its reconstruction plans if they didn't anticipate that at some point they'd be able to generate an extensive return on investment. Right. And so by going into peacetime, allowing peacetime to happen or engineering it, you're allowed to basically, capitalize on that. And it seems like the end result is just going to be Ukraine being a de facto U.S. colony at the end of the day. So I would argue that, the interest in peace with Ukraine is really an economic interest related to these companies. And this is something that spans, obviously both the Biden and Trump administrations. It's not, obviously exclusive to one or the other. And in the case of, the Trump administration, the first time, I think it was pretty clear that he helped, expand U.S. involvement in Yemen and was very open to using U.S. military assets and U.S. funding to further Israeli regional ambitions in the Middle East. So now that the Gaza conflict has been going on, it really shouldn't surprise anyone that Trump has been so interested really in facilitating that beyond even what the Biden administration facilitated. I mean, Trump's whole foreign policy approach is like, oh, I'm the deal maker, the whole art of the deal thing. And generally the deals that Trump makes are either with state leaders or they're with billionaires, right? For, this billionaire announced massive investment in this and that, or I negotiated this with this state leader, the Palestinians have minimal state representation and minimal economic power in that sense. So obviously Trump is going to be extremely disinterested in them. Right. But you could also argue that, Trump is kind of beholden to certain economic interests going back to his time before he was president. So for example, since we were talking about the mob earlier, he took over one of the most notorious mob and CIA linked companies ever, a longtime mob lawyer. And as I note in my book, alleged sex blackmailer, with really extensive organized crime connections. And so, around the time that he was hanging out on Robert Maxwell's yacht, Robert Maxwell was acting, and this is admitted by the New York Times at the time, was acting as a frontman for Rothschild Inc., which was basically this Wall Street entity that was created by the Rothschild family to strengthen their foothold in Wall Street. And they focused mainly on mergers and acquisitions. And so, Maxwell died in 1991. And then around that same time, those same banking interests bailed out Trump. And Wilbur Ross was working for N.M. Rothschild at the time and helped orchestrate that bailout of Trump. And then Trump was largely seen as having honored that by making Wilbur Ross Commerce Secretary in his first term. But basically, Trump as a business figure wouldn't be around if it wasn't for that assistance. at that point in time. And obviously, that particular banking dynasty has a long and storied history with the state of Israel. I mean, that's just a verifiable fact. So it's very possible that he continues to honor that assistance to his family's business empire as president. It's definitely not outside of the realm of possibility. The bankers involved in that were interviewed at the time about why they bailed out Trump, since for them it didn't make any economic sense. And they said, sure, his businesses are a mess. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the Trump brand is what's valuable. The Trump name is what's valuable. So these particular banking interests saw him as a figure, as a brand, as something that they could utilize in the future.
This isn't about left versus right. It's about the seamless handoff of global power from elected governments to unelected oligarchs. Whether it's USAID laundering influence under the guise of humanitarianism, or Elon Musk building an everything app atop the Treasury's data vault, what we're really watching is the construction of a digital iron curtain. Not one that divides nations, but one that wraps itself around all of us, tracking, monetizing, and weaponizing every click, every conversation, every transaction. The so-called deep state isn't hiding anymore. It's tweeting, live streaming, launching satellites, issuing loans, and buying up the wreckage of war-torn nations. And the American public? We're being trained, not informed, distracted by headlines about culture wars, while the real war is being fought over infrastructure, data, and human sovereignty. Whitney Webb has shown, again, that the most dangerous conspiracies are the ones hiding in plain sight. The US isn't exporting freedom, it's exporting corporate feudalism, enforced by surveillance and sealed by bipartisan silence. So before you cheer the next reform, ask who profits. Before you celebrate the dismantling of an agency like USAID, ask where its power is really being redirected. And before you trust the next tech titan promising to fix the system, ask what system they're actually building. If this made you think twice, don't just scroll past. Subscribe, share, and follow us for more deep dives that mainstream media refuses to touch. Because if we don't ask the hard questions now, we may not get another chance to. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.